verse 23 of the Tao Te Ching starts with, express yourself completely.
Hang on, stop.
Yeah.
Give yourself a nice space. You may want to lead with it.
Cool. Hey everyone, this is Mike McCusker. You're listening to BlindSpots, Episode 7, Part 1. ThinkyBrain Revisited. This is going to be the first part in a series of who knows how many parts. This one's going to be a beast, or a bear, or a mountain, an endeavor. It's going to be epic. Hopefully. So, to set the scene a little here, before BlindSpots, I did a show called ThinkyBrain, which was my first real kind of attempt at any kind of creative project like this, creating a show. And I did it with a guy named Brian Alstadt, a good friend of mine, really cool guy who I met while I was living in Scituate. Actually, we met while our kids were doing yoga, like a kids yoga class at a studio in North Scituate. We had some time to kill, during the time, you drop your kids off and then you sort of have to wait until their activity is over. And Brian was hanging out there and he was reading a book. I don't remember what book it was, but it was something where the title of the book caught my eye. And, me being me, I just sort of struck up a conversation with him. And we kind of became fast friends from there. We hit it off right away and we would have great conversations. We would go running together and just have these really interesting conversations about just, whatever we were thinking about, whatever was on our minds. And so when I had the idea for a podcast, I approached him with it, and he said, yeah, cool, let's do it. So we started this show, ThinkyBrain. The idea was we would meet once or twice a week, record a conversation, and then I would take that conversation and edit it and add music and do all the things, to turn it into a show, to a podcast. We got one episode out, I want to say spring, early summer of 2015, on depression. You can hear that episode on the website at IamTimeBlind.com. At some point, not too long after that, the project kind of started to lose focus, kind of fumble a bit, and then it just sort of fell apart, just became one of those things. Brian and I made several attempts during that time to try to record a conversation that could be used for a second episode, to no avail, and never quite came together for a number of reasons. Out of all those sessions, this recording has been one that I've come back to a number of times. I think it's originally it's like 11 hours long. It's ridiculous. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea at the time to just record just infinitely, and then it's fine, I'll just edit it later. I'm a puzzle, I guess. But anyways, I've found myself returning to this conversation a number of times for reasons that I hope to weave into the next few episodes. I found myself wanting to finish it, wanting to put out that second episode as a way of going back and sort of reconnecting the dots, or in some cases, connecting dots or discovering new dots and connecting them to other dots that hadn't been connected previously, or you know what I'm trying to say. It's become an important part of telling a story. And so that's what these next few episodes are going to be about. It's about telling a story. In the first episode of ThinkyBrain, we explored depression, using as a reference, among other references, the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. In Episode 2, which was originally going to be called Happy Accidents, Brian and I talked about, among many other things, executive functioning, the construct of executive functioning, drawing several ideas and points from a few books, actually. Antifragile, Things That Gain from Disorder by Nassim Taleb. Also, Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk by Peter Bernstein. The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. The Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, Stephen Mitchell translation, and I think we got back into Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman a little bit there too, which I still have not read. I still have not read that book. I actually took a class last spring. I didn't finish the class, but one of the main texts for the class was Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and I still didn't read the book. I don't know why I haven't read that book yet, but I'm sure there's a reason. Anyways, this is part 1 of BlindSpots, Episode 7, ThinkyBrain Revisited. All right, we are in. Hey, dude.
Hey, dude. I've already spiked it.
Did you?
No.
You will. You will.
How's it going?
It's going all right. It's
all right.
A little low key tonight, but you know what? That's all right. We're gonna roll with it.
We're gonna roll with it.
In the past, if I was feeling like low key, or if I was feeling like I had been exhausted earlier in the day, but we had to do something creative where I had to be on, and that night it would cause a spike in anxiety and frustration and beating my head off the wall and running around in circles and spinning my wheels that would leave me totally exhausted and unable to get it together by the time we were getting ready to hit record. But now, you know, it's just like, it's fine to be low-key. It's fine to take your time.
And evolutionarily speaking, anxiety's there for a reason, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Didn't we get into that in
I think we did.
I have to tell you, not only did some things come up in that first conversation, that first episode, that I didn't expect to come up. They were new. I was putting new ideas together in that moment. It was spontaneous in that way. But I've returned to a lot of them quite a lot since then. So in that sense, just recording that conversation has woven its way into my life and my thinking since, and has made a difference. It's helped.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. So it ended up being an hour long, and uncut, it was more like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes.
Hour and 49 minutes was the original
hour and 49 minutes. So we covered a lot of territory. And I listened to it 3 times in different states of editing. It was
that's right.
It's the most I've ever spoken, and had it been recorded and then had a chance to go back and listen to it, and it's kind of a new experience for me.
What was your reaction to hearing yourself in the conversation? Well, your ideas out loud.
I told you, and I told Karen too. I was profoundly unaware, and I can hear myself doing it now, profoundly unaware of this very specific affect I have with my voice, which is I modulate the tone and the pitch to try to make it sound like everything I'm saying is the most important thing ever.
I remember you telling me that, and my first reaction hearing that was that, yeah, but the things that you say are pretty important.
No, it's all in the tone. I'm going to be talking garbage. I don't frequently am.
I don't think that's the case. I think that might be the case in some circumstances, but I would not be fooled by your tone. I would say Brian is totally wrong on whatever he's saying, and he thinks he's right, and that's weird.
Well, that was the one thing that I picked on.
You spiked.
Oh, I sure as hell did, man. The second thing is that it's when you're having a conversation, you think you're getting it right in terms of knowing when to interject and when to remain silent, when to ask a question, when to answer a question. And I think like 60 or 70% of the time, at least in our first conversation, I was okay with that. But there were a few times when I was like, I really needed to let him talk there. I really needed to let him work out the point. And
man, I have that same experience.
Yeah. So having that amount of feedback into, and now I'm thinking to myself, God, I must do this all the time in normal conversation. And so I'm projecting here.
So you've had the opposite experience since the conversation. You're now like more self-analyzing, or what was the word that you use? Not self-aware, but the opposite, when you're like sort of like self-conscious.
Yeah.
You've become in some ways more self-conscious since the conversation, or since hearing it back.
No. Well, no. Wait, here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that I eventually do.
Okay.
So I'm projecting like us putting out 100 podcasts.
Easy.
I mean, we're already on number 12, right?
At least.
And then going back and it's Thursday night. We're going to be recording on Thursdays, and I'll listen to the final work on Friday or over the weekend, and having that opportunity to sort of like observe myself in the third person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping to sort of internalize it
mm-hmm.
and improve my sort of third person awareness when I'm having conversations.
Mm-hmm. Can I share a bit of it, not as a teacher to a student, but can I share a bit of personal advice from a friend to another?
You may.
And it's kind of funny because the reason I prefaced it was this is a piece of advice that I actually gave to an 8-year-old boy at the bowling alley this afternoon, who was Max's friend. Max and his friend were bowling in their own lane with the bumpers up, and the friend was saying, he turned to me and he said, Max is really good at bowling. I'm not as good as that. I'm trying to get better. And I said, oh, maybe that's the problem. I said, because look at him, man. He's definitely not trying even a little bit. Max, Max and I share a genetic. We share a genetic foundation in ADHD. And so for Max, you can watch him and you can just see it, because he hasn't developed the way I developed ways of covering and sort of.
Is he bowling or shot putting?
Who knows, man? He's in the moment,
Yeah.
He's just like, and as each new moment arises, the last one is gone. So there's nothing holding on, like he's just got that big hole in the bucket and it's all just pouring through.
Yeah.
It's just like water through a colander, and it doesn't hold anything. He's still very, very happy most of the time.
So what was your advice?
So I said, well, he was concerned because he thought that Max was doing really well, and Max was doing pretty well in terms of what he was knocking down. But I said, maybe don't try. See how that goes. Maybe trying is the problem. And he the next time he went up, he just sort of threw the ball and it knocked down a bunch of pins. I said, were you trying that time? And he said, actually, no. And I was like, look, you knocked down all the pins. That might have been a little bit manipulative because it was totally lucky that he knocked down the pins. It was a happy accident.
It was a happy accident. That is a great segue.
Isn't it?
It is a great segue.
I wasn't trying to segue.
Well, if you hadn't done it, I was primed. I was waiting. I was ready to interrupt you.
But that's the advice, man.
Yeah.
It's not advice that I offer to everyone, because I've gotten to this place. Before this past year, I was a person who needed things to be a very specific way for myself and felt acutely aware of that, but I didn't interpret it right. I thought this is the way everyone should be doing things. And why isn't everyone doing it like this? And if people aren't doing it the way I think it should be done, they're not doing it right. And I see that that's totally turned on its head now. Now I just realize that it's individual, and there's not one thing that's going to work for each person. So I don't offer that type of advice. I used to say, this is what you need to do. I used to offer a lot of advice. I don't like to do that very much anymore because I know that there's no way for me to know. It's total bullshit. And all I can know is what's going to work for me. Yeah. All I can know is what frame is going to work in terms of helping me to best organize my thoughts and my behavior towards goals.
That's right.
That's all.
Yeah.
It's in the moment. For me, it's got to be entirely bottom up, but that doesn't mean that it's got to be bottom up for everyone. For me, trying is the worst thing I can possibly do, but most people should try.
Well, there's probably a lot of... you've read the book Flow, or maybe parts of it. I have not.
I've pulled from it.
You've pulled from it.
I've stopped reading books, by the way. I brought all my ADHD books to the group meeting that I go to once a month last night, and I gave them out to everyone.
Oh, really?
I was like, here, take these.
Oh, wow.
I was like, do you want this back? No, I don't read books anymore.
Yeah, so there's probably some good research there that I know nothing about.
In terms of reading books?
No. In terms of doing better by not trying.
Yeah.
There's probably interference, system 2 interference, and if you can make performance an automatic system 1, then you're probably more likely to succeed by not commandeering system 2 to interfere with what is probably going to work out okay.
Yeah. What if system 2 is an asshole? What if your system 2 doesn't know what he's doing?
I tell you what, man.
Let system 1 take it.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, for me to try to intentionally do anything, whether it's a creative project, writing a song, even having a conversation, even recording this podcast, if I'm trying, I'm getting in my own way. I'm tripping over myself. To the extent that I can lay back and relax and just let it happen and not even begin to try to think about it or exert some sort of intentional effort into it, it happens all by itself. But that is not the way that everyone should do things.
No, and I'm not like that. When I'm not trying, I'm sloppy. Mm-hmm. When I'm not exerting influence, sort of like conscious self-direction, not in all domains, but in certainly musically. Mm-hmm. If I'm not really, really focusing on it, I just get sloppy and bad. I don't know. That's true of a lot of other things.
Sloppy Brian.
Yeah, sloppy. Yes, sloppy if I'm not paying attention.
But I thought that was good. I was thinking about it last night when we talked about this idea of happy accidents. At first, I thought that's a little. I don't know. I wasn't getting excited about it.
Well, this is something that we've talked about recreationally, almost like from the first time we met. Self-determination, mm-hmm. freedom, randomness versus structure. It's something that you and I have sort of like meditated on quite a bit. I remember talking about it in some of our runs.
Do you meditate?
I did meditate.
Yeah. I used to meditate. Now I medicate.
It's weird. Meditation it's just like anything else. If you take it too far and you meditate for 5 hours a day, it's self-destructive. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that aren't Zen monks, that's all that they should be doing.
Yeah.
In my mind, meditation it's like going to the gym. Let me give you an example.
Go for it.
If you're involved in the practice of meditating and you meditate for maybe like 10 or 15 minutes a day, maybe like 1 or 2 days a week, the best case scenario, you've built up this muscle in your brain or whatever kind of skill it is to be able to let things go, to let things pass through you. So when somebody cuts you off in traffic, nobody else is in the car, and every impulse in your body wants to say fuck or yell out or whatever, that is the quintessential application of Zen. In that moment of uninhibited, there's no constraint to your anger. There's no social context constraining that anger. It's just you and your brain. In that moment, can you let it wash through you?
I think you are right in what you said at the very end there, but I think you were also touching on what I consider to be a fundamental misunderstanding and misappropriation of Zen and of meditation, because what we say, at least my interpretation in the West of what we say, is I should meditate so that when that situation happens that you just described, I won't get angry or I won't yell or I won't do whatever. My take is the ultimate expression of Zen is to scream fuck as loud and as ferociously as you feel it inside of you in that moment. Uninhibited, free, spontaneous action.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Without then carrying it with you. You know, like the story of the two monks, the old monk and the young monk, and they come to the river and there's the beautiful young woman sitting there and the old monk scoops her up into his arms. And then you've been carrying her all day. It's like that. It's like it's an ancient Chinese wisdom text that's been translated, the Tao Te Ching. Most people would probably know the Stephen Mitchell translation. I think that's the most popular English version translation. He takes a lot of poetic license with it. But there's a line somewhere in here. This was supposedly written by a guy named Lao Tzu, which just translates to old man, thousands of years before Christ. There's a lot of lines in here that people would know and wouldn't know it was from here. So for instance, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yeah.
It's from the Tao Te Ching. It's all this idea of doing, not doing, wei wu wei, allowing, being like water.
Hang on. I'm stuck.
I know, I've stuck you.
No. Well, you did, but in a good way, because I want to probe this a little deeper. Because in that example, in the car...
Yeah, let's keep with that example. You're in the car. Someone's... What pisses you off in the car?
Someone's cut you off. Someone's done something blatantly, like, they knew you were there. It happens routinely.
Yeah.
And so, let's be honest, sometimes we're on the offensive end of that
I'm often on the offensive
transaction. But in this case, we're on the receiving end of that transaction. There's nobody else in the car. My citing this as an example of the practice of Zen is because here is something in your life that's very easy to get attached to. And suffering is born from attachment. Mm-hmm. So this thing happens that you can get attached to mentally. In my mind, the quickest way through attachment is to do nothing. And in your mind, the quickest way through attachment is to do something. And it's not clear to me how, if we didn't know or have practiced meditation at all, we would behave any differently.
In your mind, what is the goal of meditation ultimately, as you understand it?
Well, to put it in modern terms, it's heightened executive function. It's a little bit...
Mm-hmm. Which is what it is, actually.
Yeah, it's less impulse, a little bit more self-control and direction, with an asterisk, meaning that the self-direction is not, this may be a digression, but...
Dude, this whole conversation so far has been a digression.
Yeah, we haven't talked about happy accidents at all.
Let's just roll with it, man.
This whole conversation, we can change the title.
You know what? Depending on where we end up, comedy or tragedy, if we get somewhere, this whole fucking conversation would be a happy accident.
No time is wasted.
No time is wasted. I agree with that, actually.
In Western society, all the focus of self-determination, capitalism in Western society is on either making money or some kind of tangible self-improvement, outwardly focused self-improvement. Mm-hmm. And do you think Zen or meditation at its heart has any concept of improving the self? Well, what I think Zen does, and the asterisk that I wanted to put on it, is it's improved executive function without specific goals. It's improved executive function to both avoid the negative and to seek the positive.
Ultimately, the thread that runs through executive function is self-regulation. And it's self-regulation in a sort of an automated or not autopilot, but in a way that does not need to be conscious or intentional. If the self-regulation is strong, if the executive function is strong, and then in situations you just do what should be done. There's no interference. It's just pure action. The quote that I pulled out of this book, the Tao Te Ching, that expresses that, that I always come back to this. Verse 23, it's written in verse, and there are 81, I believe. 23 says, express yourself completely, then keep quiet. Be like the forces of nature. When it blows, there is only wind. When it rains, there is only rain. When the clouds pass, the sun shines through. Open yourself to the Tao, then trust your natural responses, and everything will fall into place. This is a poetic way of saying, when you are centered in your mind cognitively, which is what we would say would be the ultimate goal of Zen or meditation, it's not to manipulate yourself or to get you to do something, it's to find that center. It's sort of like, the idea of flow, Csikszentmihalyi's concept of sort of this effortless action where everything is just sort of happening almost subjectively. It feels like it's happening all on its own.
Yeah.
It's automatic. There's no interference cognitively. It's just pure action. It's just flowing out of you. You're not getting in your own way by overthinking it. And what this is saying is just when there's something there to express, you just express it. And then it goes. So in the car, when someone cuts you off, if you feel angry, you express anger. But then the anger goes right after. I scream all the time in the car. But then actually there are other situations, many situations, especially if there are other people in the car, where I have no reaction at all, inner or outer, to the types of things that normally people get very, very upset about on the road. I have like anti-road rage. It just doesn't affect me. I just go, whoop, that person did that, and I go. Because I saw them as soon as they started to cut me off, and I just adjusted and shifted over. It's about full and complete and uninhibited expression without attachment to the idea of it.
So, in your mind, we can explore this example, or we can shift to other examples, but when it comes to a practice in the moment of detachment or letting go, either letting go with a fuck from the belly or letting go with a deep breath and shoulders drop, which is usually what works in my case.
No, but there's no letting go. It just goes. That's the point that I'm making. That's the misunderstanding, that it's about learning to let go. There's no learning to let go.
Well, let me contrast it with another situation to take this parable of the three monks, or the two monks, and the old monk carries the rude woman across the river, puts her down. She was rude, and the young monk is angry about it all day. He's thinking about it. He's obsessed. He's attached to it. He's attached to the feeling, to the anger, the resentment, and he can't let go. Whereas the elder monk does the deed,
just does what was there.
Just does what was there. Here's a need.
Doesn't hesitate.
Fulfill it, and moves on to the next thing.
It's gone for him.
But what are some examples of the rude woman for you, where it's something that you haven't been able to let go? Are we back into the first podcast talking about anxiety and depression?
I think we're going to be back in the first podcast for many podcasts to come. That was a big one for me.
Actually, one of my regrets about the first podcast was we didn't get to talk about your depression. We spent the entire podcast talking about my anxiety.
Yeah. We could talk about specifically my experience of depression. For me, because of the way my brain works, and in particular, the working memory. I call them working memory deficits because that gives an accessible label, but I don't really see them as deficits anymore. The way that my memory systems work in real time, it's very hard for me, and it's draining, and sometimes it's just a futile effort to try to pull out specific details, and that's why I've always gravitated towards big ideas and large understandings. In action, in living, it's total bottom up, but in thinking and in talking, it's the opposite. It's totally bottom down, or bottom down, top down. It's big ideas, it's big overarching themes and general principles that sort of sum everything up. It's parsimony wherever possible.
Well, not to pursue the point, but what is an example in your life of something that maybe in 1 hour or 1 day or even 3 months that you have become attached to that you wish you weren't attached to? You see where I'm headed with this. What is an example in your life? It could be a small example. We've been talking about getting cut off in the car, but...
Use a different word than attachment, because this is kind of what I was starting to get at earlier, too. These ideas that we use these words very freely now because of this influx of the Eastern idea of meditation and spirituality into the culture that we've sort of contorted to fit business as usual. And using the example of the car, I should meditate so that I won't get angry. There's this idea that you shouldn't get angry, or you shouldn't feel angry, or you shouldn't express anger, and that's the opposite. Meditation is not so you won't feel anger. You'll feel less anger if you meditate a lot because your executive functions are stronger. You just express what's there, like the passage from the Tao. When there's wind, there's only wind. When there's only rain. And then the sun shines through. There's no holding on. It's just complete and full expression, and then silence and letting go. And it's not even a letting go, it just goes. It's automatic.
But give me an example of when it didn't go. When there was something that happened to you that...
Like 0 through 30 of my life, it was just all hanging on, constantly. The deepest and most profound aspect of this past year has been the reframing of my history with myself, and the defining characteristic of that process is seeing and accepting all of the ways that I held on to these negative self-concepts or images, these negative beliefs about myself based on what I was observing myself doing in the world. But because I didn't have the right frame on it and approached it moralistically, I was very, very hard on myself. And because I did not have, because I had at least 25% reduced executive functions.
That's quoting Barkley.
Yeah, give or take, I guess. I was not able to exercise that sort of self-regulation over my stronger emotions. But I attached to them. That's where the attachment comes in. If my medication is working, I have a much greater degree of self-regulation. It just happens naturally. There's no effort. It just happens. I just react differently to things, and because I'm able to hold things in mind longer, and I'm able to keep the larger picture in mind in the moment. But when I'm off the medication, and sometimes the medication is not working very well, or sometimes just life is just too much in my face at that moment, I still have very strong spikes in emotions. One of the most commonly misdiagnosed cases for ADHD or mistaken for ADHD is bipolar, because that inability to regulate your emotions can a lot of times produce these spikes, these highs and lows, these swings that happen. But attaching to them is where you add the narrative to it. You add the thesis. My thesis was, I just can't get my shit together.
I'm failing.
I suck.
I'm failing. Yeah.
I do the same stupid shit over and over again.
Yeah.
It's just me. I suck. It's moralistic. It's self-depreciative. It's beating up on yourself. The difference now is not that I don't have strong emotions. I still do. I still have big, strong swings of emotion. I get really, really angry. The difference now is there's no attaching to it. There's no story attached to it. It just is. It comes, it expresses, and then it goes, and then it's gone.
It becomes a moment in time instead of a state of being.
And I have no sense of looking back with regret or anxiety. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Or I'm such an asshole. I did it again. There's none of that sort of self-flogging. Flagellation.
Yeah. Self-flatulation, which is something completely different.
But there's overlap, I think. So that's the attachment. The attachment for me was never because of the behavior. It was my way of holding on to the narrative that I attached to the behavior, which was the attachment. When I use words like attachment, which I used to use quite a lot, it just feels like I'm, quoting some book or something. These words are ideas, they're concepts. They're the exact thing that Zen and meditation at its heart is about getting away from. It's not about learning to let go of your attachments. It's about not having concepts. Because when you have concepts, when you have ideas, you necessarily cling to them. Ultimately, nothing has the firm border around it that we think it does. Not even ourselves. Our idea of self or perception of ourself is an illusion that our brain creates.
You are speaking in Gödelian, Hofstadterian truths. That's the whole thesis for I Am a Strange Loop.
Yeah.
Is that our concept of self is an illusion of self-reference.
To the extent that we need those things to be solid and fixed, and there are many, many reasons why we would need that, is the extent to which we will go to contort and twist our thoughts, and even by extension, the input coming in, when we distort the world, the data, to fit into our need for it to be a certain way. That's the problem that Zen or meditation is identifying. And it's the ultimate goal or aim is to completely divorce ourselves from that mental process or rumination or just way of identifying. Nothing is fixed. Everything is changing constantly. There's the Buddha's, one of the Buddha's talks or Dharma talks or whatever they call them, where he talks about everything is burning. The eyes are burning, the nose is burning, the mouth is burning, all the senses are burning. Basically, like everything is constantly What's the idea that like everything in the universe is on a trajectory towards chaos or disintegration? That ultimately everything is like its ultimate arc is towards falling apart. Do you know?
You've lost me.
It's a more modern idea.
You had me with all the senses are burning, because if you're living in the moment, your sensory equipment is your interface with the universe, and it's alive, you know?
Yeah.
And that's it, everything becomes experiential. And I've had those moments.
Yeah.
Particularly after a good run.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Definite, total change in perception.
It's not crazy. That's directly related to your executive functions through your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. And
that's why exercise is one of the best buffers against depression, because it improves the executive functions. It pumps air into those executive functions, and when those are doing their thing, you don't need to worry about it. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You maintain your equilibrium. Equilibrium is another word that comes from all that literature.
But in those moments, it's like your senses are tingling, all of them at once. Everything's firing, and moment to moment, it's just like everything's experiential, and you've just gone a quarter of a mile, and you're not quite sure how you got there.
Because when the chemicals are all there, and that's because you're getting these big squirts of all the feel-good chemicals, and when they're there, you don't need... What is a CK's thing? When you've got bacon in your mouth, it doesn't matter who the president is.
Right.
That sums it up right there. When you're coming off of that run and you've got that sort of sense of like, oh shit, like you don't need anything to be a certain way because you feel good enough that who gives a shit.
Right.
And so ultimately our thinking emerges oddly, because one of our main points from last week was how we were coming to this idea that everything ultimately is adaptive, that we don't do anything that's not in our best interest, even if experiences are painful in the short term, which you might have had recent thoughts about. But let me attach it to this, because I have
I want to put on record I disagree with that.
Cool, we can get into that. But let me say this: we do develop these very odd patterns of thought that go against the actual nature of how things exist. Cognitive dissonance is the sort of modern psychological word.
Yeah,
this idea where we just make we distort what's coming in to fit what we
grossly
need to do. And so an example of this is how we sort of have this idea, I think, built in, many of us, that our life's unfolding, and ultimately life's unfolding in the larger sense, is growing and developing and moving towards something. Where in actuality, and this gets back to the Buddha's talk about the everything burning, life is in chaos, it emerges from chaos, and it's constantly falling apart. It's moving in the opposite direction. That ultimately, the arc of life, existence, the universe, everything that is towards disintegration, not integration. That's the point that he's making. But we turn that on its head, and we think, and a lot of our intentional, we have to become something. I have to improve myself. Meditation is a means for me to be better. But better than what? Better measured against...
Right, that's what I was mentioning, that was the asterisk before. There's a difference between going to the gym to feel good for 15 minutes or a half an hour, 45 minutes, versus going to the gym to get bulked up and to get huge.
Yeah.
Because one is immediate and is an end in itself, and the other is a means to an end.
And I would add to that, from my own view, I would never fucking go to the gym.
At all.
Never. And I would never run on a treadmill. And I used to run on treadmills, and I used to go to the gym. And I would never again step foot in a gym or on a treadmill. That's an artificial experience to me. There's nothing there for me.
Yeah, those things have fallen away. I used to go to the gym a lot.
Yeah.
But I stopped going to the gym when I started running long distance because it's counterproductive. You can't lift weights and then run 10 miles.
Yeah.
I run at night to keep cool, and one of the best things about it is the solitude. It's like the closest I can get to nature anymore is running on that path at night.
What do you mean when you say get close to nature? Finding that place in yourself where you're not Brian Alstadt.
That's a complicated question.
But is it where the thinking falls away? Because I think it's connected to what we're saying.
Well,
where you're just experiencing. You're just there. You're tied in, and your senses are alive.
When I say get close to nature, I think this is what I mean. In the moment when you're running in a chunk of real estate where there are very few lights on, you can hardly see any lights. You got your phone, and so maybe you're listening to some music. Maybe you're listening to some Time Blind. I mean, maybe you're jamming away to Kashmir. I mean, it could be happening. You don't know. But in that moment...
I know. It's happening.
In that moment, sometimes I'll turn the music off, and I'll just take it in, And the reason I do that is probably some evolutionary reason why, being close to nature. We were at the beach yesterday, and this is a relevant aside. There's something about having your feet in the ocean and feel the waves come up on you that is like mentally scrubbing. It's like taking a Brillo pad and like scrubbing your brain. There's something about it. Yeah. And running in the woods and running away from man-made creations for a moment, you could be at any location in any time. And so
that is the goal of meditation.
It's freeing.
Zen.
You're freeing yourself in space and time.
It's not about not having road rage. It's about letting the illusions of Brian Alstadt and Mike McCusker, the roles that we take on socially, and all of the inventions of the human society and culture, which are important for their own reasons, but are ultimately creations and illusions meant to serve a function in terms of keeping society cohesed. Is that a word? Cohesed?
Yeah.
When you're at the beach, when you're in vast open spaces, when you're in nature,
when you can see the horizon,
those ideas fall away, and you're just a living thing somewhere in the universe. And
I wonder what it is about.
You don't need to be anything else.
I wonder what it is about those environments that do that, because it's non-trivial. It's something that happens. Like I work in the insurance industry now. People take out huge mortgages to live in more dangerous places because they have a good view. Like there's something inherently attractive biologically, genetically about these places.
We feel pulled towards them.
And we're willing
magnetism
to spend extra money for something that on its surface has no value.
Yeah, some of us are.
Yeah, some of us aren't.
Some of us are chasing that experience. Here's what happens. You have that experience. You're at the beach. Your toes are in the water. You're feeling it. You're having your brain is scrubbed.
We were at Egypt Beach, and not a soul was there.
Just you.
Yeah.
And you're looking out at the horizon. It's so vast, and maybe it's sunset, and the sky.
It was windy too. It was choppy.
You have that experience of it all falling away, and it's so profoundly peaceful, and it's such a contrast to our daily sort of mental chattering, and when we're in those roles and we're in the illusion of life. Then what happens? Our brain steps in and says, I need to have that experience again. I need to have that experience more often. I need to make this experience last longer. I need to always be here. Thought comes in and says, I need to recreate this experience. I need to capture it somehow. I need to learn how to control it and make it my own. We turn it into an idea, and then we chase the idea. Have you ever had that experience of being present for like a beautiful sunset, and then sometime a week later or even the next day, you think, I want to go back and see that sunset again? Like we chase experiences.
Yeah.
But as soon as we're chasing the experience, we're no longer able to.
That's right. Yeah.
Then
it's a thing.
Then it's a thing. Then it's I should not be.
Yeah, and then you just said the word, which is should. As soon as it becomes a should, it's something else.
That's your big red flag. Anytime in your mind or in your words you're saying I should or anything should, you're caught in the net of that illusion, and there's no hope for you in that moment unless you learn to tease that apart and go, oh shit, I'm doing it, and then just let go.
There's one other example here. I've had a whole bunch of conversations with various friends, and they're all pretty unanimous about it, and I think you're going to be in the same camp as the rest of us. When I go to any performance that my daughter is doing, I don't take my phone out of my pocket. A lot of people are recording it. I do not. Regardless of whether or not somebody else is recording in the back, it's more important to me to be as focused and intensely engaged in the activity than it is to retain it for future viewing. In that moment, when my daughter sees me in the audience, I want her to see me 100% engaged with no distractions.
Why?
Because I think anything else misses the point.
Why do you want her to see that?
You've heard Louis C.K.'s bit about the phone. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, you watch it. We're missing it.
Nobody's watching it.
Right.
Nobody's watching it.
Right. Nobody's watching it. And I don't care if I remember it. I don't care if she remembers it. But I want the emotions of that moment to be as positive as possible.
Because over the long term, that's what sticks. especially for kids and for development.
Well, I hope so.
It's not the words. Do you remember anything like anything anybody said to you when you were younger? Or do you remember the way you felt?
Only remember the bad stuff.
And it comes back up in a very, very real way when you're faced with something that triggers that or reminds you of that.
Yep. The good stuff falls away and the bad stuff sticks. Mm-hmm. That's how childhood works.
Yeah, that's true.
Unfortunately, we evolved that way. I'm looking off into the distance.
When you're in the audience, it's your daughter's performance. In my case, it would be Max or Miles's performance, doing whatever they're doing. And you're seeing other parents, and this is more of a cultural phenomenon. It seems to be, I think it's on the decline, but there was a period where like you wouldn't even see faces, you just see the phones. What we were just talking about at the beach, that thing that steps in your mind and says, I need to recreate this, or I need to hold on to this, which is the moment where we're actually not in it anymore. It's that same thing, that same impulse, that drive in us to hold on to things, to capture them, to make them last longer, to manipulate them, to control them. That's the same thing that says, I need to hold on to this experience. I need to capture it, and I need to control it. It's the same mental state when the parent is at the concert with the phone out recording it.
Yeah. As
the person at the beach who is now not enjoying the sunrise anymore or the sunset because they're thinking about, you know what? I need to start doing this every day. If I start, I can get up and I can get here and I can be here for the sunset. It'll be beautiful like this every time. As soon as we're thinking in that sense, we've lost the thing that we're trying to hold on to by trying to hold on to it. We're trying.
Is that going to happen with the podcast?
What?
Well, it occurred to me that as you were talking about wanting to hold on to it, mm-hmm. We're documenting these conversations. Mm-hmm. Does that somehow devalue the conversation?
No. Let me tell you another Buddhist idea. You know the idea of the mandala?
No.
A group of monks will sit around. I think they're mainly made out of sand. So it's like a group of grown monks sitting around a sand table. They sculpt these. It takes them days and days and days, and it's meticulous. And they sculpt these beautiful, beautiful sand creations. They're called mandalas. Colored stones.
One grain at a time. Yeah, I've heard this.
Yeah, sure. When I was at Berkeley, everybody practiced for 10 hours a day. Nobody practiced for 10 hours a day. 1 grain at a time. The Buddha used to eat 1 grain of rice. Yeah. That's thinking. But the idea is, it's an expression of exactly what you're talking about. And this podcast and everything that I've been doing creatively is an expression of this mandala idea. They take days and days to meticulously build this beautiful thing. And then at the very end, when it's all done, it's amazing. They go, and they mess it all up. There's no holding on to it. So when we record a conversation, it's not, I really like hanging out and talking with my friend Brian, and I want that to last forever. It's creating the mandala. The experience is what counts. I experience hanging out with you and talking with you and having these conversations as profoundly interesting and beneficial in the moment, in the experience. Talking with you in this context is like sitting at the beach and watching that sunset without thinking, I really got to do this all the time. And then as soon as the sun sets, there's no more sunset. So you move on. You don't think about the sunset anymore. That's what this is for me. This is not an attempt to hold on to anything. This is just building those sand sculptures for their own sake, for the experience, the reward. The experience is the reward, or the path is its own reward. And then at the end,
it's amazing. Well, we're on episode 2, but we cover some of the same territories. But the novelty, the uniqueness of every conversation that you and I seem to have is pretty profound. Like, we spent half an hour last night planning about what we were going to talk about today.
I had no illusion that we were planning, but I thought that to your experience it was probably planning. But I knew that no matter what I wrote down or as excited as I got, none of that was going to come back tonight. Except that you have some sort of deep-seated hatred of French people.
I'm sorry? What?
It's what broke your...
Oh, right, my roommate. My French-Canadian roommate.
The only thing you hated worse than women was French people, and it was the experience of your French roommate that allowed you to let go of that attachment to your hatred of women.
That's right.
That's what I was hearing.
That's all true. And then I married a Smithy and took her name. We can't make that shift.
Way too much to unpack.
Way too much to unpack there.
For the record,
but
I've never known Brian Alstadt to hate anybody.
The point that I was making was, we thought we had an idea, and we sat down here, we just started talking. I mean, it's like the first word that came out of your mouth started, it's like somebody dropping a grain of sand on, somebody's built up a pile of sand to the angle of repose, which is the thing.
A what?
And the angle of repose. If you have one of those old-fashioned sand timers, the hourglass timers,
oh, yeah.
The angle of repose is the angle that the sand builds itself up so that it can't be any steeper. So our conversations are like a pile of sand perched at the angle of repose, and one grain of sand drops on the top of it and creates this cascade of activity, which is actually a thing in chaos theory too.
It's like that game at the arcade with the quarters and the dump trucks, and you stick the quarter in and throws it, and the goal is to be that one quarter that's going to make all the other quarters fall.
They're all right. The
angle of repose.
Angle of repose.
I love that phrase.
But our conversations are novel. We don't...
Did you say novel or a novel?
Well, we could... I mean... no. They are novel.
Your original reservation, if that's the right word, is that what this podcast is in some potential danger of becoming?
I wasn't worried about that.
But that was the idea that you were expressing, whether you were worried
Honestly,
about it.
I wondered if there was some hypocrisy there.
Was
all. It was a very Marinesque, like, holy, are we our own assholes? Like,
yeah.
Are we
the assholes we've been waiting for?
We are pontificating about, absorbing a sunset and not wanting to attach to it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we are recording ourselves talking and then putting that recording out into the universe.
Yeah.
Which is kind of my version of lighting it on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, putting stuff out in the universe is terrifying for me. Like, when I want to attach to something, I hold on to it and keep it in my brain. So
when you let it go, that's it. If you love something, you have to let it go.
Well, it becomes immutable. Once it's
now
out
I'm
there,
the one looking off into the distance.
Once it's out there in the universe, you can't change it anymore.
Yes, you can. I re-released my album 3 times in 1 week.
No, but you're doing all the work.
But this is the same experience. I put it out without having it mixed properly because I just couldn't sleep one night. I was like, I'm going to make an album. Take all that up. Now you're an album.
But you did.
And then I woke up the next day and I listened to it. I was like, oh shit, track 2 distorts. Oh, I don't like the mix on that. That one's too loud. That one's too soft.
I haven't downloaded the re-release.
Yeah, I deleted it. It's gone. But
I downloaded it and then you deleted it. So I'm still dealing with version 2, not version 3.
Oh, you have version 2?
How many have you released?
At least 3, I think 4. But what were we saying just a minute ago? Because there was something really good in there.
I was thinking about
the hypocrisy. You
right.
You're wondering about the hypocrisy. Are we, kind of fooling ourselves a little bit here? Are we being full of shit? Are we saying one thing and doing another? And my answer to that is absolutely not. And I say that with a firmness that I say few things in expression of, with that firmness attached to. Fuck, I get hung up on phrasing. Because for me, it's just like the mandala, it's just like the thing from the Tao, it's just like the wind blowing. The wind blows and then it stops blowing and then it's not blowing anymore. It's expressing completely and then being silent. And that's the idea of letting go of attachment. Not intentionally letting go, but there's no idea of attachment. It just, you've got bacon in your mouth and you don't care who the president is. You're not actively trying to not care who the president is. That happens automatically.
You said the purpose of Zen is to turn life so that all accidents are happy accidents.
Yeah, the ultimate goal, you wouldn't call it a goal if you were actually there, but the ultimate purpose of Zen is to turn the entire experience of your life into just a series of happy accidents.
Which is the whole...
I did hit record again, but let's just...
fucking point of this book.
Antifragile?
Antifragile.
Nassim Taleb.
Antifragile are things that gain from disorder. Things that gain from randomness.
Yeah.
So
gain what? How do you mean gain?
You cannot hide from chaos. You cannot hide from disorder because we live...
That's what we do, though. That's ideas.
Well, no, but we think we can,
dissonance.
but we can't.
Oh, we can't? No.
You can't. You physically can't.
No.
So many people that try to protect themselves from chaos fail because they can't anticipate the kind of chaos that's out there.
They're setting themselves up to fail.
They're setting themselves up to fail.
And they don't even realize it.
So the whole purpose of this book and the whole purpose of this thought concept is to expose yourself to chaos, expose yourself to accidents,
yes,
but make yourself anti-fragile to them so that...
Anti-fragile. Let me sit on that word for a minute. Anti-fragile. So fragile, not fragile.
Things that gain from disorder.
Yes.
It's not the same thing as robust. Robust means that you're neutral to disorder. You're immutable. You don't change. When chaos happens, you stay pretty much the same. Anti-fragile means...
Equilibrium would be the Buddhist spiritualist word. Oh, equanimity, I mean. Equanimity.
Oh, I hate the word equilibrium.
Yeah, equanimity.
Equilibrium is a 4-letter word. But anyway.
It's got a few more letters than that.
The whole concept of antifragile is because you cannot escape chaos and randomness, open yourself up to it and allow yourself to be improved by it.
Yeah.
There are certain systems.
Which is the natural way things unfold.
And this is exactly my problem with this book, is that this...
Which book is that?
This is The Story of Risk. It's Against the Gods.
Because we're recording something.
Against the Gods, the remarkable story of risk.
Yeah.
And this is basically a history of the mathematics and the personalities and minds that created the mathematical tools that got us to the modern era of risk management as of 1996.
Risk management.
Risk management.
That's a word right there.
And this guy sees as heroes Black-Scholes.
Black who?
Black-Scholes. He invented these guys.
Oh, it's a person.
Well, no, it's actually two people that wrote a paper about the pricing of options.
Okay.
And all of the tools that go into portfolio management and finance, Galton and the invention of the normal distribution, all of these things that have been employed to try to make our lives more predictable have only made us more fragile to chaos because they've given us the false belief that we're controlling risk. There are certain risks that are beyond our control.
Yeah.
Some are within our control, but some are beyond our control. And those that are beyond our control, we need to understand what domains they are. We need to open ourselves up to them and then design our lives so that we can tolerate some punches. Yeah, not only tolerate, but benefit from.
It's like a 476-page extension of the Serenity Prayer.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. But he's diving into what it is. God grant me the courage to change the things that I can.
Courage to accept, or is it the...
Well, it's the three things.
The courage to
change the things that I can.
Something... I just know the third one, because that's the one that applies the most to me.
To know the difference.
The wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah. Hang on, pause it.
Yeah.
I want to know this. So what's the Serenity Prayer?
The Serenity Prayer is, well, you just said it, man.
It's...
God give me the strength.
God give me...
Let's say it together like we're in Mass.
God give me
God give me the strength. Lord, grant me the strength to change the things that I can, the courage to accept the things that I cannot change, or something to that tune. Who gives a fuck? It's
Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the strength to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
And it's awesome, except, and the kind of the beautifully twisted thing about it is its foundation is in this exact idea of dissonance that we're talking about, because the whole idea of God in the first place is just the ultimate, the widest net over this experience of trying to impose order on disorder and chaos.
So
uncertainty in a universe that is entirely uncertain.
The Serenity Prayer is exactly the same statement as what you told me, or was you said in the first podcast, which is always make new mistakes. That's the same message as the Serenity Prayer. It's the same truth behind both of them, which is life is structured but chaotic, and you need to know the difference. So you need the strength to reach out and change new things. You need the courage to make new mistakes. But you need to...
But ultimately, at its purest and most profound expression, these ideas don't contain the ideas themselves. There's no intentional trying to parse these things through. It's just letting go into the river. Because if we are living without attachment, which is sort of tying back to what we were saying before, then we are not thinking about what should be, what should not be. We are not thinking about what we could change, should change, can't change, wisdom to know the difference. These are just ideas that come up to the thinking mind that is trying to impose order. And the fact that it arises from the Serenity Prayer, which is an appeal to a higher authority in being in existence.
Yeah, but you don't need it. To me, that's not the point of Serenity Prayer. You can take the God part out of Serenity Prayer. In fact, it confuses it because...
Well, let's take the God out. Because now there's no God in the Serenity Prayer, and it's just us saying that we're going to change something, that we've made ourselves God.
Well, no. It's the essence of life. It's the essence of life.
I agree. But as soon as we put it into words that way and turn ourselves into agents of the essence of life or agents into the expression of that essence, we've made ourselves into something that we are not.
If you don't move, you die. The absence of motion is certain death.
Be not afraid of moving slowly, be only afraid of standing still.
That is true of locomotion. As soon as you stop moving, your muscles start to atrophy. In business, if you don't innovate, you die. In life, if you don't grow and adapt to new challenges, you don't grow. You become static and mentally dead. If you don't move, you die. You have to do something. You can't do nothing.
But could you do nothing?
No, you can't do nothing. If you do nothing, you die. Buddha sat in the woods for 6 months eating air or whatever. And if he had stayed there 6 months in a day, he'd be dead. If you don't do anything, you die. You have to do something.
But my question is...
I wasn't done.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
You have to do something. There's a dot. Yeah. Non-action is equivalent to death. You can't do nothing. Okay.
It is death.
If you have to do something, what do you do? That's where the Serenity Prayer comes in. If you're going to do anything in a world such as ours, you need to know the difference between what you can change, what you can't, and what actions are likely to produce some kind of predictable response. And if your predictions aren't matched by the response, you need to be able to evolve. Zen, taken to its logical conclusion, is inaction. You know, the Buddha was moments away from death before he figured his shit out. You know, if everybody was a Zen master, there would be no economy. You have to do something. And
I think this is one of the few times that I'm finding myself disagreeing with you strongly on the inside, because I think that what you're expressing is the absolute essence of the fundamental misunderstanding of what these ideas are, particularly Zen meditation.
That may wholeheartedly be the case, and I'm willing to update and revise.
Let's go into it.
But let me flesh this out a little bit more.
Take your time. I'm not going to interrupt anymore.
When I say non-action is not an option, we're all born at a very early age, and we grow up, and the most primal needs are food, nourishment, and shelter. From there, climb up Maslow's pyramid if you want, to, you know, belongingness to groups, to universals, whatever you want. But the most bare elementary needs require action, either on the individual's part or on some other individual's part. Non-action by an individual is not an option. It's the shortest path to death. So if you have to do something, what do you do?
And that's where the idea that
that's where things get complicated. That's where evolution comes in.
How do we decide? How do we know what the right thing to do is?
Evolution has structured our brains to give us the best probability of making the thing that we do productive to passing on our genetic material. You have to do something. What do you do? Evolution has given us all these heuristics, all these rules of thumbs, and then an executive function to think outside the box when need be. That's a reality. We can talk about Zen and we can talk about nothingness.
Did you say executive function when we need to think outside the box?
When we need to think outside, that's the purpose of executive function.
Executive function is self-regulation. It's being able to keep your eye on the forest for the trees.
That's why he gave us a frontal lobe. I'm confusing my terms there.
Who gave us a frontal lobe?
Evolution gave us a frontal lobe.
He's a he? I'm sorry, man. I'm being a dick.
No. Actually, that's fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. Because I hate French people. Evolution gave us a frontal lobe to be able to solve hard problems that heuristics couldn't handle.
I don't think that's right. I don't think that the frontal lobe is solving the hard problems. I think the hard problems are getting solved in the lower parts. I think the frontal lobe is the one going, you, not you. The executive functions, they're the one sitting at the top making the executive top-down decisions that will determine, they're the filter. It's the filter on the input and the output is the frontal lobe. In my case, I have reduced executive functions. That's the sort of the quintessential physiological component of ADHD. So what I experience subjectively is that too much is coming in and too much is getting out.
Well, hang on. Let's climb down the tree of life. Let's climb past monkeys. Let's climb past dogs because they clearly have an executive function. And let's go to mice or horses. Virtually no frontal lobe. They have a frontal lobe, but it's very small. Not a whole lot of executive function there. But these mammals, these lower mammals, are packed with heuristics. They are packed with heuristics.
Can you define heuristics? Because I'm not...
Heuristic is a behavioral rule. It's an if-then.
If this, then that?
If horse that I want to mate with nuzzles me, then game on and let's go. If hungry, eat grass. Some are more complicated than others.
Finding the patterns, the repetition.
It's not finding, it's executing. We're born with these heuristics. These are built in genetically. When we are born, these heuristics become unpacked with time. Horses don't go to school, they don't learn. 99% of everything a horse knows it was born with. There's very little learning in horses. Maybe it's 94.
Okay. That might depend on our definition of learning.
Humans are different. 99% of what humans know is... let me say this differently. I want to be clear here. Humans are also born with a system of well-developed heuristics. We have the mammal heuristics. This is our system 1. And I'm probably really sloppy here, and anybody with more expertise could probably jump in.
I've got a guy that we can bring in at some point.
And tell me how I'm screwing this up, because I know I'm screwing it up.
No, you're good.
But we've got these mammalian instincts. These are our heuristics. These are system 1. But we've also got this huge frontal lobe that is huge relative to every other mammal that's walking on the planet.
Yeah. That's what differentiates us biologically.
Differentiates us biologically. It gives us language, gives us reading and writing, and it gives us the ability to transfer knowledge, to accumulate knowledge.
But how? What's its function? What is it doing that allows us to do that? Is it doing those things? Is it allowing us to do that?
It gives us the ability of hindsight and foresight.
I'm going to throw something in here.
It's all about time.
I'm going to suggest that the frontal lobe and the executive functions more like a magnifying glass on an ant. When you're a child, maybe you didn't do this. I did this.
I totally did that. I did worse. I had a brother.
You've got sunlight coming in.
Oh, yeah.
And the sunlight alone is not going to light anything on fire. It's not going to light the ant on fire. You put the magnifying glass over the ant, and it harnesses those sun rays that are already there, and it concentrates them and intensifies them. And in doing so, it builds that heat to the point where now it's changed the output. And I'm going to suggest that the frontal lobe and the executive functions are like that. They're a filter on our input that concentrates the output. And that's why humans are different from the other forms of life that you were describing, because we have an ability to concentrate the input. The output is concentrated through the filter of our executive functions. It's intensifying the input to the point where it becomes usable in a different way.
It's not just intensified, it becomes qualitatively different. Setting another way, a horse lives in tiny increments of time. 1 second to 1 second to 1 second.
I can relate.
It has very little working memory, and its heuristics are almost entirely immediate. All of a horse's behaviors have payoffs that can be measured in seconds. Humans and dogs and some cats can project further in time. Qualitatively, that's what's different about humans. And Berkeley, and this is what I want to get into with the next book that I'm going to read by
Barclay's Executive Functioning.
Barclay's Executive Function book, which is the whole purpose of the executive function is to slow things down and to establish behavioral rules that have payoffs that cannot be measured in seconds, but can be measured in days, weeks, months, and years.
But this is supported by what I was saying, because imagine this. Create an image in your mind of our perception of time, foresight, hindsight, present moment awareness. Use the horse as a contrast. Without the executive function, the input is coming in, there's nothing to hold it, so it's coming immediately back out. And that's our experience of not having executive function, or the horse's experience. It's only in the present, it's incremental, it's moment to moment, because there's nothing in its brain functioning that can hold on to the information that's coming in. So it's one for one. It's not thinking, it's not in the sense that we're talking about.
I'm using the word heuristic to describe that action, that stimulus response. Stimulus response. It can only be that way because there's nothing that can trap that input, that stimulus, in order to manipulate it. Like, you need to be able to hold something in your mind. Well, that's the working memory.
To manipulate it. That's a combination of the executive
That's
function.
one of the
working memory is one component
one of the
that.
5 that he talks about.
Right. And it's those 5 as he's ideating them. But together, whatever the number is, its main role is to provide a stopper on the input that's coming in, the information that's coming in, so that it doesn't flow immediately out, so that we can hold on to it long enough to be able to manipulate it. And then what is happening when we're manipulating it is that the other functioning of the other parts of the brain are able to sort of do their thing longer. It's processing the information more deeply or just for a longer period of time, which creates a qualitatively new type of output.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think we're saying the same thing.
But the executive functioning it's like an intermediary between the input and the output. It's a filter. It's not actually doing anything. It's just allowing that input to stay long enough for the rest of the brain to do its thing longer.
Well, I think it's doing a couple things. The way you've described it, and I could be misinterpreting you, it makes it sound like...
I'm not saying it as clearly as I'd like to, so it's on me.
Well, the way you're describing it makes it seem like the purpose of the executive function is to heighten the abilities of the heuristics that are already there. It's to slow time down.
Our perception of time, and it's only a perception, it's an idea. It's something we've created. There's no actual idea of time in nature outside of that one-for-one horse experience. We're all actually just in the flow of life. What we're doing is we're trapping that input stimulus, holding onto it for a little while and playing with it in our minds. And that's thinking.
Well, okay. So it's the first thing that Barclay's, I keep screwing up his name. It's Barclay.
Barclay, yeah.
Barclay. One of the purposes of the executive function is to put the brakes on the automatic response, is to stop that from happening. So information, you've just
and
received
Halliwell talks about that idea of brakes as well.
Yeah, we've just received some novel information. We're not quite sure what to do with it. Our brain wants to have like a knee-jerk response, but something is triggered in our frontal lobe that says, whoa, slow everything down. So we don't do the normal heuristic that would normally be employed in that moment. We stop that, and that is the executive saying to his underling, nope, like keep it on your desk for a moment.
Yeah, the executive is often used as an analogy like a CEO or an executive.
Right.
As like it's the boss, but it's not the boss. It's just a filter.
Well, no, it's more than a filter. It's much more than a filter.
What is the thing that traps? Maybe filter is not the right word, because there's another word I'm reaching for, but it's not quite there. But it's basically, it's the executive function, just like the rest of the brain, just like our total nervous system, its function is reactionary. When we say it's an executive or it's the boss, that gives it a sort of measure of agency and intention that it just doesn't have. It's reacting the same way as we are. The difference is it's trapping the input, the stimulus, and holding on to it long enough that we are able to manipulate it and change it in our minds. So I guess what I'm saying is that the difference, the fundamental difference of being a human from being a horse is that
I just got your point.
Being a human is like playing a game, like a board game with a child, and the child is just making up their own rules as they go. Like that's what humans are doing. We're taking the natural world, we're taking the horse experience of input, output, stimulus, response, and we're changing the rules as we see fit for whatever reason. That's what our thinking is doing. These ideas that we create that then we need to make real, but they're ultimately not real. That's us just sort of being that child, making up the rules as we go. And so what executive function allows us to do is it allows us to all go, okay, these are adapt to the ever-changing rules. Ultimately, it's just a game that we're playing, and it's evolutionarily linked because to the extent that you can play the game...
Well, let me try to articulate what it sounds like you're trying to say is that, so we have the System 1 heuristics, which are simple heuristics. And then we have the System 2 thing that has the skill set of the executive function. And what it sounds like you're saying is that we have these simple rules that basically we were born with. They're very much the same as what a horse might have. And then we have this frontal lobe. And what these are more complicated rules. It's still rule-based. It's just a more complicated set of heuristics that we have a little bit of control over the development of those heuristics. Is that what you're saying?
Imagine your sink at home.
Yeah.
Imagine your colander, your spaghetti strainer.
Yeah.
In your mind, put the strainer in the sink. Turn on the water.
Yeah.
The water's running through the colander.
Yeah.
The colander's not holding the water.
Yeah.
The water is stimulus, input, coming in through the senses. The output is what's hitting the drain. The colander...
Whoa. I already reject your model.
Wait. I haven't... So the colander is the horse brain. And the water maybe would be better described subjectively as a sense of time. So the time is just, it's in constant, immediate flow. There's no ideation of the future or the past. There's no looking ahead or looking back. There's only water flowing through the colander.
Yeah.
and it's always new water. Now imagine you take some paper towels, fold them up,
Yeah.
nice and thick, put them in the colander, running the water through. Now the water's not flowing through. The paper towels are absorbing the water. It's slowing down the flow. It's holding some of the water in. Maybe it's pooling, it's collecting.
Yeah.
Eventually it's spilling out the sides. It's going into the drain slower, and it's interacting with the paper towels.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is the paper towels are the executive function. They're not really doing anything like we would call intentional. They're not the boss. They're allowing the water to stay in the colander. Maybe the colander is the brain. My analogy is not really fully formed here, but it's a good one. They're allowing the stimulus, the information, sense information to stay there long enough. It doesn't just flow straight through. It's staying longer. And what we do then is we're able to then manipulate it in our minds. We're able to hold it. And let me draw an experience from my own life. The subjective experience the first time and since every time that I take Adderall, which is a cerebral stimulant, is that suddenly, instead of my brain being like the colander and the water just flowing through and I can't hold on to it, which is why I don't have a sense of time.
I'm with you.
All of a sudden, it stays longer. And when it stays longer, I can look at it in my head.
Okay.
And I can do things with it. It changes the output.
Water is information.
Water is information.
Our brain is an information processing tool. That's what it does. It processes information. What does it mean to process information? To process information, what book was it? It was BlindSpot. BlindSpot, which is another book that I read the first chapter of, and then I started reading another book. The beginning of this book, and a few other ones, talks about the volume of information that we take in through all of our senses, through all of our 5 senses, and there's a 6th one that has to do with balance.
Proprioceptive.
Yeah, there's right. So we have 6 senses that are taking in information.
My balance is better on Adderall too.
Okay, well, I'm getting to that. So I really want to tighten up the metaphor about water, because our brain it's not like information just passes through our brain. Our brain is an information processing machine. Why does it process information? Because it's designed to pass on its genetic material. That's what it's designed to do.
It's not designed.
It is designed. It's absolutely designed by evolution.
But evolution is not an entity.
No, that doesn't mean...
It's not a designer.
Of course it is.
Well, maybe it's just maybe we're
Purpose.
semantical. A designer implies
a tool has a purpose.
An intentional, intelligent...
No, it doesn't have to be intelligent, but it's purposeful.
So it's not an intelligent designer.
No, it's not an intelligent designer. It's
like
the blind watchmaker.
It's kind of like a dumb designer that everyone's like,
right.
Look at this guy.
So
the blind watchmaker?
Yeah, that's a famous book by DAWKINS. That basically it's like, nope, you can have purposeful design without an intelligent designer. And it happens through evolution, and it's a normal thing.
No,
let me press on here.
Yeah.
Our brain is an information processing device that was slowly shaped by evolution for the sole purpose of passing on our genetic material. Don't die, reproduce. Rule number 1 and number 2.
In that order.
In that order.
Yeah.
Don't die. After you've reproduced, it doesn't give a shit if you die, so to speak. I mean, you could just look at the anglerfish as an example about that. Thank you. Okay, so our brain takes in information, processes it for the purpose of survival and reproduction. That is the purpose of our brain. Happiness is secondary. We take in some, terabytes of information in our senses per day. This volume, this constant stream, if we're out in the middle of New York City, the volume of information that's coming into our brain is higher than it would be if we're in a dark room with no noise, right? So there's varying stimulation. In different times of the day when we're awake, there's stimulation coming into our senses. Mm-hmm. This is what you're likening to water. Our brain is designed to pay selective attention to that information. It's designed to be triggered by certain types of information that comes into our senses for specific responses that increase the probability of survival and procreation. That's the purpose of our brain.
And what selects?
What selects? Well, there's a hierarchy.
I'm saying that the executive functions are what select.
And what I'm saying is there's a hierarchy that was also conditioned by evolution. You know why that exists? Is because if you look at single-celled organisms, they have rules for survival and reproduction. You go to multicellular organisms, you go to plants, you go to funguses. All of these organizations, all the way down, all the way up the tree of life, have rules for survival and reproduction in their nerve centers. Even that worm, I forget what worm, they have nascent brains. which are basically
nascent
brains, which are basically stimulus response tools to increase the probability of survival and reproduction, all the way up and down. So who's deciding in our brain? Well, we have 3 layers of what's going on, and probably more than that, and it's probably more complicated than that. But we have the lizard brain, which is all the way at the core. You know what the lizard brain is responsible for?
Sleep-wake cycles.
Here's the best example I can think of. You ever watch a baseball game, and the angle of the camera is right behind the pitcher. And so you're watching the pitcher, and you can see the catcher. And every once in a while, there's just a nick of a foul ball, and it goes straight into the crowd behind them, except there's a net. But what does the crowd do? They all dive out of the way. Nobody decided to dive out of the way.
Right.
That's the lizard brain.
Right.
That's get the fuck out of the way. It's straight to the amygdala. Get out of the way. Nobody had a single thought. It's immediate. It's the red phone.
Right.
That is the lizard brain in
The
action.
net is the executive function.
Hang on. I'm building up to that. So we have this very base layer of highly built in, way deep things that are very physical types of stimulus and response activities. Blinking when something gets close to your eye, swatting at a mosquito. These are lizard brain type behaviors. Heuristics, I'm using the word heuristic. If something's coming at your face, duck. That's a heuristic. On top of that, we have mammalian heuristics, which get to bordering on social. Horses have heuristics that are social in nature. You know, even birds have pecking orders.
Yeah.
They have heuristics that...
you see that with the chickens all the time.
That, beat up on the little one.
Yeah.
Because, they're not doing it on purpose, but those heuristics have developed as a way to increase the probability of survival and procreation. As you get more and more complicated in the brain, your heuristics get more and more complicated.
Right.
They get more and more complicated, they get more and more developed, and in each case, the purpose of the heuristic, that ducking out of the way of a fastball as it nicks off the bat, the payoff of that heuristic is measured in milliseconds. When you get to the mammal brain, the payoff of a heuristic, getting to nuzzling the horse, heuristic, if a horse is nuzzling you that you want to get it on with, go nuts, the payoff of that heuristics can be measured in minutes. As you add each layer of complexity, the payoff of the heuristic gets more and more distant in time.
Yes.
That is the evolutionary advantage of a big frontal lobe.
Only if you are living in relationship to other big frontal lobed creatures. Because if you're a horse, you don't need it.
It gives you a huge advantage over tigers. It gives you a huge advantage over tigers.
But if you're a tiger, you don't need that to be among other tigers. You just need the tiger brain to survive as a tiger.
Big brains are selected for.
In humans.
No,
in general.
In all species. Because the whole... God, there's a great article on this. It's by John Holland, and it's called Complex Systems. And there's a quote I want to read.
You want to pause? Want to look it up?
Yeah.
I got it. Okay, that's ThinkyBrain Revisited, part 1. While Brian looks up that quote, I'm going to go make some spaghetti and maybe find a horse to nuzzle. And we'll be back with part 2 very soon. Mike McCusker, BlindSpots. Bye for now.
Slow down time. Hide my mind. Find my kind. And empathize with your eyes. Slow down time. Hide my mind. Find my kind. And empathize with your eyes. time.